Welcome to the Decolonizing Global Health podcast, a conversation brought to you by the African Population and Health Research Center. My name is Michelle Mbuthia. Today we have a very exciting conversation featuring three leading voices in transforming global health research and policy in Africa. Joining us all the way from Nigeria via Australia is Dr. Seye Abimbola, a renowned scholar and thought leader in Decolonizing Global Health, leading the charge on rethinking how knowledge is produced and used to better serve African contexts. Next to him, we have Dr. Kabiru, an expert in population and health research, dedicated to advancing evidence-based solutions that are locally led and globally relevant. Last but not least, we have Dr. Frederick Wekesah, epidemiologist and distinguished researcher, and recently awarded AfOx Fellow. Welcome.
Thank you.
So let's dive right in. How does the concept of decolonizing global health really reshape the way we approach evidence generation, knowledge translation, and overall policy influence within the African context? Dr. Seye.
Thank you very much. That's a very good question. I will offer a rephrasing of it.
Okay.
Because I prefer to talk about what is colonial and undoing that, or reversing that, or removing that, rather than decolonize, as it were. So I will start answering a question by asking myself, what is colonial about how we do research? And I think in many ways that what is colonial, at the very heart of it, is a swapping of agency. So I take away someone else's agency and I replace their agency with mine. And by so doing, I can do anything I want to do to them on their behalf and claim it is in their own good. So when I'm thinking about the answer to that question, what I'm asking myself is, whose agency is replacing Africans' agency in the processes involved in knowledge production and in the processes involved in policy making and programs and implementation, etc. Now, and that's a very Africa sort of view. So I'm sort of zooming out and say Africa. But the same logic also applies when you zoom in to Africa, as it were, and say even within Kenya, which groups of people are having their agency substituted by the agency of others. In other words, this is all about power, really, and often about money as well, and about privilege. And so for me, what we have to pay attention to very carefully, one is not necessarily separating the international from the national, because the same power dynamics you see being beamed into, say, Kenya, by big funders or big countries or influential actors globally, you find the same dynamics replicated within the country like Kenya, where, again, people with power and money and privilege are able to swap people with less power and agency. And so, again, what does that mean for how we do research? I mean, I think it means something really radical. And when I say that, I mean it seriously, but I also know in my bones that most people may not know what I'm talking about, or that it might be hard to imagine. And it's, I often liken research or the engagements of the research process to the engagement you may have between two sexual partners. In that it's the kind of engagement that you have to negotiate and renegotiate. You can't take anything for granted. You can't assume before, during, or after that you have the right and the power and the etc. to do anything. Right? So everything requires that kind of gentle, careful, respectful listening, making sure that you are not exercising your power in ways that trample on another person's power. Again, I've answered in very abstract ways, but I hope you can see how it applies to almost everything that we do.
Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about quote-unquote parachute research and the power dynamics there. So I wanted to come to Caroline and ask, so what role do these power imbalances, these power dynamics have in that disconnect, really, between evidence and then how it's used in decision making, so at different levels?
First of all, let me first acknowledge that I really found Seye's way of framing it as what's the word that you say? Eloquent. I think you put the eloquent words into what I would have responded. And for me, really, it's about just bringing it down to even community level. How do we go into communities when we're undertaking research? Do we go into communities thinking we have the answers to their questions? And I think that's what you're saying about taking away agency, because people who are living the experience are the ones who really know what it is and who could possibly begin to formulate the solutions. And I think our role then is to facilitate that process of understanding rather than assuming that we know. And I think personally for me as a researcher, I often struggle in terms of the research. I really want it to be research that touches aspects of my own life. So I work on adolescent sexual and reproductive health. How do I make those ties to being a mother, being an aunt to an adolescent, and what I hope for them? And so I think in a way, if we are thinking about how we have to reshape the way we do things, is we have to create that platform where we are going into communities to facilitate conversations around what evidence is needed, what the challenges are, what evidence is needed to support that, how we as a research organization can partner to help that process, and then work together to find the solution. And I think in our own work, we've had very good examples of working with pregnant and parenting adolescents, going to understand their lived experiences, but also in thinking about the solutions with them. What is it that they feel needs to be done for them to experience a better life? So, yeah. And I think it's what Seye was saying about agency and building on people's agency rather than taking it away.
Okay. So Carol has talked about working with the communities who essentially are usually the end beneficiaries, end users of this evidence that we produce. But there's a different layer to this, which is the policymakers. So I don't know what your experience has been and how probably we can also incorporate them in this discussion so that they also lead the charge and not just us.
Yeah, I agree again. The issue about power and agency, really framing the whole concept around decolonization, right? And the shifting of power, across. And I agree also, Seye, it's not just about the global north or global south. There are practices that we have borrowed from the global north, the colonial practice, that even as local players still, use locally, that takes away the agency and the power of the communities who work. But coming back to you, Michelle, the tripartite of research, we have the generators, we have the users, in this case, maybe the policymakers. But at the center of it is the communities, right? And you're saying these are the three different layers that come together to ensure that there is a proper generation and translation, actually generation, interpretation and translation of the evidence. For me, the proper way of working with the communities, which really are at the very end, whose outcomes we really want to impact, is ensuring that, as Caroline mentioned, we respectfully work with them. And there are increasingly different frameworks that are being applied. Meaningful engagement of communities, trying to ensure that the people that eventually would be beneficiaries of the evidence and the policies that come out of the evidence that we generate actually get involved from the very word go. So the meaningful engagement of communities, and you hear words like acknowledging and properly documenting indigenous knowledge. And it's not just a buzzword, really. Increasingly, we have to make sure that we understand that the locals that will eventually benefit from the evidence and the policies really have something and a stake to, at the very beginning, ensure that the process is clear, the involvement is clear, and has been properly structured, right? So that bit is there. And Caroline talked about meaningful engagement. And it's not just about the communities, people with lived experiences. In her case, of course, adolescent girls. I work in the mental health space, and meaningful engagement of people with lived mental health experience is increasingly become a thing of importance, right? So ensuring that from the very beginning, the understanding of the issues that we are researching is clear and actually incorporated in the problematization. The measurement of the issues that we are talking about is actually informed by the understanding, so that the interpretation follows really the structure in which they can understand. And eventually during the translation, they're actually part and parcel of knowing what good comes out of the evidence that we generate. So really going back and saying, how do the three layers, the generators in this case, the researchers, the policymakers who use the evidence, but at the core of it, the communities that would benefit from it, really become part of the part and parcel of the process from the very beginning to the very end.
Okay.
Yeah.
We speak a lot from an African context because we are African, and mwamba ngoma uvuta kwao, basically to say the one who makes the drum pulls towards the side. But the question is, rather, it's not just Africa that is experiencing this whole north-south thing. So what can we learn from other contexts? What has worked there, and how can we apply that in our context then? Let me start with Seye and then Alfred.
I often make this allusion that if you want to understand a thriving local knowledge ecosystem in the world, go to countries that don't speak English or any European language. Go to Thailand, go to Indonesia, and just go and observe how they use knowledge to solve problems.
Yeah.
And you'd find just how rich and organic and internally connected those spaces tend to be. I was at a global event recently, and someone was presenting evidence on a particular thing, and I sort of had this systematic review with all the papers, and I listed, I think, 3, 4, 5 papers from Thailand. And there's a Thai person in the room who said, no, that is just the ones in English. Right? That there are orders of magnitude more that we use and that are far more consequential for our policy making. In other words, there's a conceit in the European language speaking world that sort of almost suggests that whatever is not in English or whatever is not outward facing does not exist. And I don't think it's by accident also that Thailand is one of those countries that have a thriving connection between research and policy ecosystem. So they have this huge, again, really, really important and consequential bridging institution that sort of overlaps between the government and researchers, where there's a conduit between evidence knowledge production and policy making, and vice versa. Right? And again, it's not by accident that Thailand is one of those countries that have universal health coverage achieved and built over this space of about 20 years and continues to grow in both depth and reach. And when if we want to learn from other places, to my mind, those are the places that are best to learn from. Places that have not been overly captured and consumed by what I often call the foreign gaze. Places that have had reason to take themselves seriously on their own terms. And that's really what this ought to be about. The taking of oneself seriously on one's own terms.
That feels like a challenge to self. No, like you need to take yourself seriously on your own terms, so that other people can take you seriously. And you were just talking about how there's a preference for either English or French, European languages. And I just thought about how we also deal with each other on the continent. The English speakers versus non-English speakers. Those who speak European languages, those who have platformed other languages, African languages, I should say, as their national languages or official languages. And there's a definite power dynamic, in as much as we don't like to say it, but it's definitely there. Anyway, we are at an African research institution. We generate evidence, we work with others to generate evidence, we work with universities. So how then can academic or research institutions really transform their own research agendas, knowledge translation agendas, to play a more significant role in this decolonizing health agenda?
Is that to me?
That's to you.
Okay. I was thinking it was
Everybody else.
Let me start from where I left off, which is taking oneself seriously, because that also includes taking the people around you seriously. So one, what does the country need, really, in a very serious way? And again, not in a, this is what Western countries have, we want to have it. But really saying, what do we need? What will solve our problems? Again, putting energy behind that. Second, asking the question, what marginalizes people in this place? What are those factors? And how can we marshal the knowledge infrastructure to disrupt that, right? It could be gender, it could be disability, it could be poverty. Again, so taking those huge factors very seriously and saying, what is the knowledge need that will disrupt that? Third point, taking the people fighting against those things seriously as people who not only produce knowledge in the process, but also need knowledge and evidence to strengthen their hand. And saying, who are those people fighting on behalf of the people who are marginalized in this place? What do they need? How can I be of service to them? And again, putting oneself in other words, just taking, it feels like, you repeated that point, now it's stuck in my head. Like taking oneself seriously and taking the people around oneself seriously and not allowing, this is how it's done. This is what it looks like in some other place. This is the standard that they use in this other place. But saying, what does it look like for us? What does it look like for us? And I understand that there is there's a slippery slope argument to be made against what I've just said, which is that, are you saying we should do substandard things? Are we saying we should lower? Are we saying, are we saying we should be comfortable with things that are inferior? Which is a bad argument. It's a very bad argument. I know people make that argument. It's a very bad argument. Because, again, the United States, it's not the United States. The knowledge infrastructure in the US doesn't look like it looks without the politics and the history of the United States. Yeah. Same with anywhere you land in Europe. All their knowledge infrastructure, to the extent that it serves them well, are built to serve them well. Mm-hmm. And we have to stop doing copy and pasting and saying, we now have a number of counties in Kenya, it wasn't there 20 years ago. What does that mean for how we generate evidence? In other words, just attending to the particularities of the place in the here and now and over time.
What I'm hearing is you just don't want us to do any more benchmarking visits. And that's
to develop countries to be.
Yeah.
No, it's important. It's important to know what others are doing.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's important to know. In fact, the more you know and understand what others are doing, the better you're able to do what works for you. Because you are then looking for good ideas and adapting them. And also you force yourself to explain why it's different in England versus France, right? Versus Netherlands, versus Thailand. You're asking yourself, why is it different?
Yeah.
Because then you can look at yourself and say, well, I don't have to look like any of them. I have to look like myself. Right. So we should still do benchmark. We should do all of those things.
But not for sure.
But not for real good reason.
And I mean, I think what Dr. Seye is saying really is that frameworks and approaches can be transferable. but the issues are different. And we are all starting at different points, really. So innovation doesn't mean copying and pasting. Just because we have AI models for telemedicine in Europe, because the infrastructure supports that kind of innovation, doesn't mean we should actually be doing the same here. And I'll give an example. There's a time a few years back we were doing some work on a landscape review on malaria. And the issue was that there are new tools, as they call them, in malaria research to help prevent and manage malaria, right? Case management and things like that. And by talking to local stakeholders in Africa about these new tools that have been released, how are you finding them? The question that kept coming back to us was, but we have had so many other tools that we have barely optimized. And all of a sudden, it's about how we are adopting the new tools. Is our challenge adopting the new tools or optimizing the existing tools? And that was becoming a challenge. So you can actually see that the issues are different. We are starting at different points. We can transfer approaches and frameworks, but it doesn't mean we are copying and pasting the exact innovations happening elsewhere. And I totally resonate with what he says regarding that point.
Okay. I just wanted to come back to Caroline about the learning from different contexts and how we apply them. I just wanted to get your own perspectives on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
One, can I first begin by saying what I think research should look like ideally? Is that we are all living in a place and we're all thinking, how can we make our lives better? And we say, okay, I think we need to know more about how we can improve this particular aspect. And then we're all in the room. They're the researchers, they're the community members, they're the politicians. And we say, oh, okay, so this is what we're solving. These are our 1, 2, 3 priorities. And then we tell funders, these are our 1, 2, 3 priorities. How are you going to help us? If Northern country comes, Kenya comes to you, Tanzania, these are our 1, 2, 3 priorities. How can you help us get to where we want to be?
Yeah.
Ideally, that's what I think. Of course, in an ideal world, that's how research should be. That it's the priorities of the people that are driving the fundraising, that are driving the investments, rather than someone having the tools for malaria and wanting to see them applied. And yet, in this particular context, in fact, we just want clean water. We're not worried about the malaria. But in terms of the question that you are asking, I think we can look within even Africa. I think there are good examples. And I think most recently, I received an invitation from the Southern African Development Community Parliamentary Forum, and they were having public hearings because they want to improve the oversight for correctional facilities with respect to human rights. And what I really liked is, there were emails coming out every day. Today we're having a meeting with religious leaders. Today we're having a meeting with people who are working on LGBTQ issues and things like that. And for me, I stood back and I said, imagine if all policies on the continent were made that way. We know in Kenya what public participation means. The ad is hidden deep down in the Wednesday edition of The Nation, page 3, that nobody reads. And it says you need to come for the public participation hearing will be at 9 a.m. next Thursday. Or you can send an email. Yeah. Now, first of all, no one has read it. No one can get time off to go to the public hearing at 9 a.m. on a Thursday morning. And so, really?
And the email bounces.
And it bounces. So for me, I think they are good examples on how these things can be done, even on the continent. It's just how we learn from them. And really, at the end of the day, if you're thinking about we must do best for ourselves and the communities we live in, then you think, how can we really open up spaces, even for policy making, for the public to participate in that policy process in an open manner, because that's not the case. Yeah.
Okay. So it sounds like we have a long way to go still, but are there any, apart from the SADC one, which is simple and it sounds like a closed group of people, are there any other examples that we can borrow from where, the evidence to policy continuum, was just connected, the document loaded, the documents downloaded sharp, everything was good?
You're looking at me. Let me think. one example that will come to mind is, of course, from the adolescent sexual and reproductive health space. And in 2015, we were involved in the policy process for developing the 2015 Kenya Adolescent Sexual and Reproductive Health Policy. And the way that was done is that there was a technical committee. It included everybody. Of course, it's led by government. As researchers, we were on the table. There were many implementing organizations. And I was a bit far removed, but I do hope that they also had engagements with young people and the communities where young people live. But what I really liked about that process is the openness to diverse views. And we know sexual and reproductive health is a tough space. You add adolescence into the formula and it's very contentious. But when you look at that policy, you can actually see a forward-thinking document that recognizes that young people need access to comprehensive information and services. There's recognition of the vulnerable groups, even within adolescence. And I think that came about because the space was open for everyone to share their inputs and to share evidence. Because if you look at that policy, it actually cites some of APHRC's work around the vulnerabilities of young people living in urban contexts who might not have been considered a vulnerable group. And so for me, I think that's what we need. We need those platforms where we are regularly engaging, but we also need to think about how those platforms are financed. It takes resources. And I think we also need to be flexible. They always don't have to be in 5-star hotels. And we often don't have to have tea, lunch, afternoon tea, allowances, and other stipends. Really, if our interest is how do we improve our lives, because those are our lives, then I don't think we need all these other surrounding benefits to us.
Can I give one
Please.
very different example,
Please.
but also from the continent? So in Ghana, the health system is run by something called the Ghana Health Service. And within Ghana Health Service, very often, the people running Ghana Health Service are people who have spent time in academia. So that's like a rotation thing. Has been going on for decades. And I've been begging them to write about this because I think it's a beautiful, brilliant arrangement. If I suspect it's informal, I don't think there's a rule about it. But that's how it happens. That if you see someone who sort of occupying a serious senior position in Ghana Health Service, just Google their name. They've published 15 papers about what they are working on in Ghana Health Service. And that's how come they don't have to fight this battle of knowledge use, knowledge translation, etc. You hardly hear them talk about these things in that language because they work differently. Their national health insurance scheme is run by people who are scholars and practitioners in health economics and financing at the same time. So it's a different arrangement that allows these things to flow, as you were saying, almost seamlessly. And if you don't know what's going on, you don't understand it. Like you just think things are happening magically, but there's a logic to it.
Okay. Interesting. I want to come back to the issue of the role of research institutions and universities. As someone who's been the beneficiary of so many fellowships in different universities in the global north, I'm sure you've seen things there, seen how they work. What can we learn in the whole spirit of learning from other contexts? What can we learn in terms of our own push for this decolonizing global health? So you are sort of like a student. Now you're working in a research institution. You observed what you observed when you're out there. Continue to observe. What can we do different here? Right.
Yeah, I think it goes back to understanding our priorities first. I think everything really goes just back to what are our priorities, really. Approaches and frameworks, again, can be transferred, but the issues are really unique to the settings in which we live. there are tried and tested approaches, at least from where I sit, that can be used to ensure that that continuum from evidence generation to interpretation and to translation is actually proper and benefits the communities and the people that really whose outcomes we need to change. And this include things like having proper understanding on who pays research as who pays for research, as Karen said, and for what purpose, and who stands to benefit from the evidence generated from this research. It's increasingly, we know that we react to funding priorities, but as Caroline said, can we have a structure in place, even locally, that says, listen, guys, we want you to put money in this pot and help us address the issues according to this ranking, because we know we don't have a lot of money anyway, and we can address one issue after the other, but knowing that this is how they are linked. If we build roads, then we can ensure that we can buy ambulances, because ambulances need roads to get from point A to point B. And then if we have ambulances, we know that before ambulances get people to hospital, we need to have properly, resourced departments for emergency and things like that. So I think, to me, that understanding is really important. But in terms of evidence use and evidence generation, I think having knowledge translation institutionalized in our setting is really, really important. That you're not just going to have ad hoc generation and use of evidence, but it's actually embedded in the way we do things. So, for example, if Parliament is where policies are made, within Parliament you actually have rapid review units that inform parliamentarians who then propose laws that become policies, right? So the mainstreaming and the institutionalization of evidence generation, translation, and interpretation, translation should really be mainstreamed within these purposes. More importantly is ensuring that the key players are involved, because at the end of the day, there's this tension between who generated the evidence and why is someone else supposed to use it. And yet they were never there when the issue that's supposed to be a priority or at the core of the evidence that generated was discussed. And it could well be that it was a part of an RFP that APHLC responded, or any other research institution, and said, you know what, we need to talk about AI use in healthcare provision, a very important area of work, but does the local infrastructure, even when we deliver the evidence to the policy users, accommodate, or can it midwife that evidence and actually make it work? So really mainstreaming the evidence generation and evidence use, and ensuring that we have these knowledge translation units within policy making organizations, really, really important. We also operate on a very acute cycles, cue COVID-19, right? Where we really don't need this framework sometimes approaches where, you move from point A, point B. Sometimes we just need to quickly put together, what information we have, how do we go about it, what has worked elsewhere, and what can we do, where do we get the funding, and all these kind of things. And that gets to happen. I think I may not quote a specific case, but I imagine that in European or global North organization, when something becomes a priority, funds are quickly made available to address that issue. And so that should be what should be happening around here. I don't know, they're going to call it some kind of supplementary funding or things like that. So I think all these issues about, first of all, respecting yourself, as you said, and understanding your priorities, and ensuring that you have knowledge that is proper to guide the policy-making process. And cue the example of Ghana Health Service, for example. You know what happens in political cycles where you have new people, sometimes people who do not understand what they need to do, come in and try to lead a process that they have totally no idea about. And that should really change going forward.
It's something that keeps coming up. I've had it like 3 or 4 times, and I think it would be remiss of us to leave here without talking about it. The issue of funding and how it plays a huge role in this decolonizing. We can't take ourselves seriously if we don't budget for ourselves, if we don't have our own money, right? And I think the whole funding cut situation has really shown us that this is something that we need to do a bit more. We need to take a bit more seriously. What can we do as part of taking ourselves seriously, financially?
As we were discussing just now, I was thinking about in the School of Public Health at the University of Sydney, where I work, there's a unit called Prevention Research Collaboration. And that unit is essentially funded by the government of the state in which Sydney is. They give money to the unit to do research on the initiatives, policies, programs that the ministry rolls out. And they keep renewing that funding arrangement every, I think, 5 years. They renewed it again earlier this year. And it's not a lot of money. Like, it's not boom. But it's there consistently. And it can be counted upon. You can hire PhD students to work on the project, knowing that the cycle will continue. You can establish a professorship or someone who runs it. You can do all of those things. And when I'm thinking about here, I am acutely, very strongly aware that we are not rich, but we also waste a lot of money and steal a lot of money.
Yeah.
So those two things can be true at the same time. Right? Not being rich and also stealing and wasting money. Those two things,
The tea and coffees that come
are
back.
true. Right. So there's a part of me that understands that I won't expect or ask for millions and millions of dollars from, say, Nairobi County Government or Kenya Ministry of Health for a PhD or for university, right? But I would expect that they can, put down a few hundreds of $1,000s a year to service their knowledge needs. And it's the kind of thing I believe we should be able to advocate for. Like, where is your budget line for research institution that serves you? Right? And it could be any institution. I'm sure there are many academic and research institutions in Nairobi alone. Like, one of them should have that kind of agreement and arrangement with the Ministry of Health. And again, it doesn't have to be too much money. And I'm saying that in part because, I'm very aware, and it's a very difficult thing to say, I have to say it very carefully. In the place where I live and work, right? A large chunk, I won't put a number to it, a large chunk of the research is pointless. The place will not look any different, healthcare will not be any different, life expectancy will not change, maternal mortality will remain the same if you cancelled all of them. Not all of them, a large chunk, that chunk doesn't do anything. It's good for people's careers, it's good for publication, it's good for all of those things, but they don't really matter. A few things matter a lot. Like a great lot. And you can see those things. If you walk on the corridor of where my office is, you can get a sense of, okay, which are the things that this place depends on? And then which ones are superfluous, right? Again, I can't say this to my colleagues, they will stone me. But you get the gist of what I'm talking about. That if we then come here, it will be then wise to not try and replicate that entire thing. Right? But to say, that slice that is important, what does it look like here? Again, it's not very expensive. Things become expensive when we want to copy and paste.
Yeah.
Right. That there are things we can do that serve immediate, consequential, important needs and are not very expensive.
But what would we do when we are living in contexts where one of the first things to go in the budget is R&D? I mean, what you're saying then...
In the national budget?
Yes.
I have a theory for that. I'm talking too much now, but I'll be very quick. I have a theory for that. I was discussing with my boss recently when this AI thing started and our neighboring university cancelled the entire School of Public Health. So University of Technology, Sydney, which is just down the road from us, they have put a proposal.
Public health is.
Yes, to abolish it. And my boss was asking me, what do you think, there's a Yoruba saying that Ikuto Kojuba in your Wilong Parfene, which is the death that killed your neighbor, is sending a message to you. So my boss said, what is the message here? And I said, I'm not sure. But everybody is saying these people are stupid. maybe we are the ones who are stupid for thinking they are stupid. Maybe there's a logic to that thing. In other words, is it possible that there are things people determine are not worth spending money on? They may be wrong. They may be wrong in that determination, but there's often a logic to it. Now, in the Kenyan government example, I will speak as a Nigerian, and with my experience growing up in Nigeria, that I understand that we don't think of research as something that is ours. Something somebody asks us to do, and we do. They say, do research, do. Build universities that look like it's built. Have a department of this, have. Publish papers, publish. Have journals, have. Right? There's a lot of things that we do because someone has asked us to do it. And when there's a shock, those things go. There's the first thing to go. So again, the question is back to us. How can we make R&D something that the government and the people of Kenya, not just the government, the people care deeply about, that it becomes difficult to let go? Now, again, it comes back to it being in the service of people in very clear, direct ways. Yeah. Sorry, I've talked.
No. And there is what to add, because I think you just hit the nail on the head. Have we done a good job of explaining the role of R&D in a country's development? And honestly, I think not. And so people don't see the value until we can have that open conversation where people completely understand what research does and what it can do and what it can't do, because there are also things it can't do. Then it's when countries can see the value in investing. And I agree with you. I think African countries do have the resources. I mean, it was just this weekend we were told that a certain party, I won't mention, spent 200 million for pretty much funfair.
5-day funfair.
5-day funfair. So it means the resources are there. And I know even earlier this year when the funding for the demographic and health surveys was pulled out, a colleague who works with one of the government agencies says, Kenya can, because this is someone who is familiar with the processes, is familiar with what it takes to undertake a Kenya demographic and health survey. And they know that Kenya does have the resources. But I think there isn't that understanding of the value of data and how data can drive decision making. And I think in part, we do have to blame ourselves for not showing that or explaining it well enough so that people see the value in it. Because, you only invest in where you see value. Otherwise, you'd rather invest in schools because, people need an education. Maybe we were told by the people outside that we need an education. We invest in health because people need to live. So we need also to communicate, to do a better job in communicating and tying those threads together.
I'll take that as a challenge to myself and everyone else who's in the communication and advocacy field.
And the visibility thing.
I was holding myself from saying that. No, you said it.
Perhaps I can also get your take on that.
We don't have a long-term development blueprint, even in most African countries. And if the development blueprints come with each and every different manifesto and every leader, and it's not that tied down to say long-term generation of evidence that informs development, then clearly innovation doesn't stand out as an important place to invest. Research is not tangible. It's not something you see. Governments and politicians want to invest and develop and put their money where people can see things happening. Roads, when you build a road, they'll see a road from point A to point B, from A to Z. Research is happening, and we wait perhaps a cycle for the evidence to come out. And if I was a leader of a government, again, I won't say which government, there's several governments in Africa, I would make the decision like, listen, guys, I really don't think we need to put money in research. Perhaps we should already go and solve the problem we think we have, right? And let's go back to copy and paste again. I mean, if we are copying and pasting innovations, then perhaps we should just wait for other people to work on those innovations. And then we really serve ourselves the thinking part and perhaps just come and see whether we can tailor it, adopt it for our settings, right? And therefore, we save a little bit money of the thinking and the consultations, and we just perhaps just keep a little bit for tweaking, right? So there's a policy that has worked for PMTCT in another country. We said, okay, have they thought about it? How does it work? Who are involved? Okay, so can we bring it and try and see how it is? So you see why it's easy to actually slice off some amounts from research and development, because if we use innovation developed elsewhere in our settings, then that becomes a problem. But it's okay that we keep innovations prioritized within our setting to solve our priority needs. And therefore, as we earlier said, just because AI is a big thing elsewhere doesn't mean that in our settings, it should be where we're putting in money for research and development. Should our universities, for example, be changing the whole departments? University of Nairobi is perhaps known for engineering, mechanical engineering. All of a sudden, you're having new ways of motoring. If that was to happen every other time, they have to keep changing all the departments and things like that. And therefore, that balance of political cycles and what the politicians promise, lack of the development, a long-term development blueprint, and the copy and paste of innovations just makes it very difficult for most governments to set aside money for R&D, as it were, and which affect the research that we see in our settings.
Okay. There's a lot to think about. But there's something you said about governments not necessarily being able to understand the importance of data. And I mean, as an outsider, I'm not really a researcher. Ground zero for you guys is publish. Publish. You have to make sure that you publish. And so recently, there was a debate about publish or perish. In some quarters, I've had it termed as publish and perish. So regardless of what you do, you will definitely die off. But it comes with a lot of pressure. So my question then is, how does this academic pressure impact how research is then able to be generated that is quality, relevant, but also is plugged in such a way that it still continues to drive this whole this is our agenda either as a country or a community, and so this is what we want to do in this way. I can start with Fred. Can I go like that?
Publish or perish, publish and perish. I'll go back to who are you publishing for, right? If you link publishing as making evidence available, and it has to be tied down to priority issues in government, then you have to work with the people who eventually need to use that evidence. Now look at it practically. If that is how the process needs to go, then that will delay when your paper comes out.
Are you looking at
Following? I know Shay has a lot to say about this, right? If it has to be linked to, you're making it functional publication. I think that's the word for it. Then that will really delay when your papers come out and which papers come out. And that has a way of constricting someone who needs to have 10 papers for promotion by the end of the year. So if you look at how reward system around publication is structured, and what we are discussing here about who are you publishing for, what are you publishing, who is funding the research, and all these things on one other side, you can actually see why publications that exist, perhaps 90% of them, really don't eventually end up informing evidence. I mean, evidence that informing decision-making or policy-making processes, because they are put out there for quick count and tallying, and saying by the end of the year, Frederick, what is your tally this year? What was the first author paper? What was the senior author paper? Which other people did you assist in putting out their papers? Did you achieve the 5 for you to get a promotion? Luckily, we don't do that in IPHC promotion around papers yet. Maybe we may get there, may cut the academic process. So really, that's where I see it. There's a big disconnect about the reward system and why people publish vis-a-vis the conversation we're having about here. Publishing as a way of showcasing or disseminating evidence and making it available for the decision-making and policy-making. But more important, it's where do we publish? Do we have to wait for research to complete before we put out evidence that can be used in policy making? That's how the funding system is currently structured. As a PI, Caroline may not want to publish something in the interim and say we have some interim findings, so this can support our government or county governments to get going in something. She may want to wait until we have the full picture, the full data set. And yet, in a course correction kind of system, you want to use any data you get, just like you do service data. You have Ministry of Health data coming out. We say, okay, what's the trend today? Can we analyze this quickly and use this information coming out to course correct? And therefore, it's just the way the system is structured vis-a-vis the function for which we put out this publication that I think makes it a big problem. Would I still subscribe to Publish and Perish? I don't know, man, because I've had conversations around it's the currency with which you are known. Seye wouldn't be Seye without his 100 papers published. Are they all useful? I'll let him answer that question.
A good fraction. A good fraction.
Of it, yes. So you see that there is that, pressure within, pressure without, and why we do certain things. But I think importantly, if you keep out the noise, it's important that whatever we publish and wherever we publish is to make evidence available, quickly available, rapid reviews available for use in evidence and decision making.
Okay, you're looking at me, so I guess you want an answer. And I think publish or perish, publish and perish are all linked to the currency for how we evaluate science. And I think we need to ask ourselves, why is it the currency and should we change it? Because I think anytime you peg promotion, you peg recognition on papers, you've made them actually an end. Yeah. And we have to ask ourselves, is that the end we are looking for? So for me, it's all about, perhaps we need to think about the impact of our work. And I'm taking APHRC as an example. Our broad goal is to transform lives, and we have to ask ourselves, where do papers fall in that transformation? Then that will push you a little bit. And I mean, I've had the argument that, well, we need to publish more. I mean, 3% of the global output is all from Africa. But I'm like, yeah, but even 1% can make a huge impact. And maybe that's where we need to be. I think the push to, when we make papers an end, then we begin to see all these issues that we see, predatory journals, because, I mean, someone has figured out people need to publish, so I might as well make money out of it. Kudos to them for their entrepreneurial mind. But I think it's problematic. You hear of people now undertaking unethical ways of getting their work published. I think recently there was discussion about someone whose paper ended up being retracted because they were the peer reviewer and they did not declare the conflict of interest. But I think we need to think about all the pervasive, the negative incentives for people to do that, and we need to change that. And for me, it's always the question about where is that paper falling into this continuum of transforming lives? And it also changes the way you publish. And I think I've seen a number of colleagues who are great examples, both within and outside, where every paper you publish, you make sure you communicate it in a broader forum. Because, I mean, the people who make decisions based on the evidence do not necessarily go to read peer review papers. So it's about, okay, we've published this paper on X, Y, and Z. This is what it means. This is how we could use it to improve and transform lives, which is our goal. So it's about taking the next step. You publish the paper, hopefully in a good journal, and then you now break it down to the people who need to understand, and including the community, because unfortunately, I think many times we forget the very people we collected data from, we publish. That's our end. But we forget we collected data from the community. Don't they deserve to know? And to be that, play a part also in sort of the transforming lives, because they're the ones who hold government accountable. This research was done. It showed that we are X, Y, and Z. We need these sorts of programs. Where are we with that? And communities can only be accountable if they're empowered. So I think, for me, I do think, publish or perish, publish and perish, all because of the currency that we've used to rate science.
There was a discussion recently that I was part of where someone said maybe each academic should be allowed a maximum of 5 papers a year.
That's a lot.
You're not allowed to be co-author on anybody else's paper.
Okay.
Or this person said maybe for a career you have 30. Or I don't know, and then or 50, and then you have to judiciously use each one, so that you really think carefully. Is this worth publishing? I don't think that will happen, but it's a useful way to think about what it may look like for each person to think carefully about the point of a publication. But something I noticed when I was editor-in-chief of a global health journal, and I was during COVID-19 pandemic when it hit, something I noticed and has stuck with me was that a lot of the papers about COVID that were really good had done their work before they were even submitted. In other words, a lot of those papers were done in close proximity and relationship with decision makers of all kinds, and had already done the work they were going to do primarily in the space that it was done and used before it was even submitted to a journal. And it struck me that could be another way of thinking about publishing. Like, can we, as you were saying, often in the policy process, you iterate. And you don't need to go and publish and then show them. That you can show them. And then do that over time and then publish at the end of that process and then use that publication to account for, reflect on, document that process. Again, it goes back to this idea of how we think about the relationship between the research or knowledge ecosystem and policy making and decision making. That if we ease the separation that we've held in our minds about them and start to imagine them as things that could be more closely entwined, then it's easier to begin to think about what the publication's role is, which, to my mind, ought to be a secondary thing after the thing has done its primary work. Now, because you mentioned my papers, something I found when I was reflecting on my PhD, soon after my PhD, was that I did my PhD by publication, was that I, myself, my own head, was the primary beneficiary of the papers that I published. Right? In that the papers helped me think clearly about the things I was thinking about and writing about. And that any other benefit, frankly, after that, was secondary. That in many ways, those papers just helped me know how to think about things. And I promise you, I'm still using those things now. Right? I'm writing an essay now, I'm writing an article now, I'm teaching a class now. I'm bringing those things that I help clarify for my own head during my PhD in the classroom in an essay. Right? So again, thinking clearly about what is this thing called a paper for. And I think I've been wanting to write an essay about this for a long time, which is what is the purpose of a paper. And I'll tell this story when I write it. So this story of, it could be for you, right? It could be to document a process as we described. It could be to change how people think about something.
Change how you think.
Sorry?
Change how you think.
How do you think about something?
Yeah.
It could be to advance a method. There are different purposes to a paper. What I wish is that we are clear, so that in every instance we know why. We have a clear theory for the thing. And again, what bothers me often is the mindlessness, which you are talking about, Caroline, which is that when there's this thing called good as law, which you're describing, when a measure becomes a target, it becomes corrupt. Right? Like when someone says publish 20, I will give you 20. Yeah. I will do it without caring about what each of them means, because 20 is the goal. I will give you 20. And I feel like that is the problem that we have. It is that publish or perish paradigm, that we have to think differently about the point of publishing.
Can I just quickly add that I think we should apply equal weights to peer-reviewed journals and blogs and newsletters, because all this really, you cannot separate the thinking of the author who wrote the paper to what they applied their mind to the newsletter and to the blog. And all these things have different purposes and reach different audiences.
Yeah.
And Caroline, to answer your question, I mean, if I need to make material available to the community that participated in my research, perhaps it's not behind a paywall in a peer-reviewed journal. It could be a blog, or it could be an infographic that is splashed in a billboard closer to the community and things like that. And therefore, to me, publishing really has to be expanded beyond the peer-reviewed, high impact factor journals, and more importantly, about what all those products that relate to the research that one did. And equal weight, and perhaps even more weight, should be applied to those products that reach the community than those that are closed within the scientific community, as it were.
Can the product also just be having a conversation?
Or just have a conversation. And I think Seye mentioned that yesterday, that the origin of publishing as we know it started in small journal clubs.
Yeah.
You know, in those Victorian days of senior professors, because there were few, and they would meet and just have this scholarly conversation, and that was it, and maybe document it as part of minutes. And today's model looks totally different and very commercialized.
In fact, the earliest journals would have minutes of those meetings.
Minutes.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Yeah. Minutes, and then later they would start to write include the scientific papers.
Yeah.
And the oldest medical journals would have speeches and lectures.
Yeah.
Those kind of things.
No, I think the kids nowadays say what? Clock it. But you sound more and more like a knowledge translation ambassador. I feel like my job at APHRC is done.
Well,
Next one.
we work together, I guess. Yeah.
All right, so we have to come to the end of this conversation because we can be here all day. But so, as you conclude, I know Carol gave us her utopic idea of what this evidence to knowledge, continuum would look like. What does innovation in that sense then look like for you, Fred? Just in brief.
Let me make sure I understand it. Innovation in evidence generation.
Okay, how do we do this innovatively, moving forward in this decolonized world?
Yeah. Again, I think it's just perhaps what I just touched on. Let's promote. Let's stay woke. I finally used that word. Let's stay woke in what's developing in terms of the platforms where we are allowed to publish, because they are there. We can't fight them. They are the ones that make our work visible. But let's try and tailor these platforms to accommodate different types of products, right? So can we, for example, link one, as you said, one idea, one issue that we are promoting in a paper to all the different products that are generated, to just see how we position them for the different audiences, for policymakers, for the communities, for yourself, and not to self, that I wrote this and this was the insight that I found this. So can we find a way to ensure that all these efforts are linked, and that the outcome from a publication, the impact from a publication is actually multiplicatively, enhanced, because you tying all these avenues, all these platforms, all these tools together to be able to communicate to the different people. Because at the end of the day, we are saying that on one side, we have evidence generators. In between here, we have the communities that are part and parcel of the process. But in a big chunk are the source of the data that perhaps we get. And on the other side, we are the evidence users, right? And therefore, ensuring that we have products from the evidence that we generate that communicates, that makes the evidence available to all those people. And that in our policy process, we know the end of the policy we want to get to, and we start from the very beginning by engaging all these kind of people, knowing that when the product comes, we are all together owners of the product that is generated out of the work that we do. And therefore, the reward is not just to me as the leader of the article or the product, but everyone else who participated in that. And in a way, they're acknowledging the process.
You want to build on
my earlier point?
Yeah.
I know we talk a lot about co-creation. It's another buzzword that's used a lot. But I do think that we need to think about how we collectively identify solutions or priorities and then work towards the solutions in our work. I think we need to shift even how we fundraise. Should we fundraise based on funder priority, or should we think about the priorities together as a community? And I mean, I'm putting the researchers as part of the community because of how I'm visualizing community as being broad and including many stakeholders. And then that guides even how we fundraise. Also engaging with funders to shape their priorities, because we assume that they just sit there and these are their priorities, they're married to them. Actually, no. I think if you engage them, they can begin to see the point. Maybe we should invest here and not there. Also governments, and I think an actor that we often don't engage with, at least not at APHRC, is the private sector. How can we even shape some of what they do to embed research in it? So I do think that that element, I'll use the word co-creation, is important, and a way that I think we really should frame the way we do our work. And I do think we need to, now I'm speaking for APHRC as the African Population and Health Research Center. I know in our capacity statement, we often say we represent 10 countries in Africa, 18 countries in Africa, but do we actually use that? Because we need to think about the globalization, decolonizing, where an outsider is coming to tell you as an insider what should change. But can we use our diversity as an organization to be how we break that down? Can we use the Nigerian in the community to lead the work in Nigeria and, to have that presence, that bring that lived experience? Because at the end of the day, I do think lived experience is so important.
It's a really powerful tool.
Yeah.
Innovation. I don't know. I could I could suggest a broad range of things that make everyone uncomfortable.
Destabilize, please.
I'm gentle. I think that the most important focus of change is ourselves. It's in how we see ourselves and our function as researchers. I often use this expression that our work should be able to be defined as helping to connect a system to more of itself. And you can sort of interpret that in 1,000 ways. It could be, for example, that there are voices in the community that the government needs to hear, and hear in ways that trigger action. It could be that there are research needs, or there's the value of research that needs to be communicated to the community, so that connection then leads back to political prioritization. It could be connecting civil society actors, activists, advocates on a particular issue, connecting them more closely among themselves so that their voices are stronger. It could be connecting them to the government. All kinds of axes of connection. I wish we could see ourselves in that way, because I feel that is when we are most useful. It's when we help connect the system to more of itself. And also then, secondarily or subsequently, or in addition, helping to build platforms that facilitate those connections. Again, you can imagine what those platforms look like in 1,000 ways. But again, helping to build those platforms. It could be the data infrastructure in a place. It could be institutions that perform that bridging role that I described in Thailand. It could be relationships that bridge, like I described in Ghana. All kinds of platforms to help facilitate those connections. Right? That's my wish for how we see ourselves.
All right. Let's hope that somehow these wishes, these ideas, end up just not being like utopic fantasies, that somehow we can actually make them part of our realities. Yeah. That's it for us, folks. Thank you very much to my panel, Dr. Seye, Caroline, Fred. That's it from us.
You should repeat your name again.
My name is Michelle Mbuthia. Catch us on the next episode of the Decolonizing Global Health podcast.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.